Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
The Red Brigades. In March 1978, the Red Brigades kidnapped former Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro, murdering his bodyguards. For nearly 2 months, they held him hostage while a shocked world looked on, before eventually killing him and dumping his body in the middle of Rome. The new book has come out called The Red Brigades, The Terrorists Who Brought Italy to Its Knees. It is written by John Foote. I'm delighted to say that John joins me live on the line now. John, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us. What's your background to writing about the Red Brigades?
Well, I'm an historian. I've worked mainly on Italy in the 20th, 21st century. And I've always been fascinated by this group. I also tell a little story in the book that I actually came across a couple of them who'd been released from prison while I was in Milan at a book launch a few years ago. And that really intrigued me that they were out of jail and joking and chatting in a book launch.
Italy sort of post-war is a very interesting, to put it mildly, situation, because on one side you have a very strong communist movement post-war. On the other hand, you have a very right-wing movement as well, which perhaps will maybe come up to its zenith when we have the bombings in Bologna in 1981. But
1980.
Yeah, this is a snapshot of a Europe that is going through turmoil in the 70s. You've got Baader-Meinhof to a certain degree over in Germany. You've got Red Army faction in Japan, and you've got the Red Brigades in Italy. Tell me a little bit about how the Red Brigades came into being.
They came out of the movements of 1968, 1969, the student movements, which were vast in Italy, but also the workers' movement. There are huge strike waves in Turin, Milan, Genoa. So they're kind of a mix of those two. And they're the fringes. Some of the people on the fringes of those movements, inspired by Vietnam and Che Guevara and all those kind of things, believe that to make the revolution, you need to get guns and do something which they call the armed struggle. Yeah. So they're relatively small, but they swim in a certain much bigger sea.
And is this the sort of because the ideas of the protests in 1968? You're thinking obviously Paris, for example. You've had the Prague Spring. You've got the Grosvenor House in London. They're thinking, okay, well, the hippie quote unquote movement isn't going to make it love and peace, man. So we've got to take up the armed struggle. We've got to take this, and inspired by Che and his and what's happening has happened in Cuba. It's like the only way we're going to do this is by the gun. And so therefore it becomes very, very militant. So, but can you argue there is like I said before, there is a history of perhaps in a way that there isn't in other areas, for example, obviously of Germany, that there is a history of a socialist movement, stroke a communist movement there that's already embedded. So it's quite easy for them to get to make that step amongst some of the more deranged members.
Yeah, I mean, some of them actually come directly from the Communist Party, and they think the Communist Party is too moderate. There's also a kind of threat of a coup. There's a lot of kind of outrages and bombings on the right from about 1969 onwards. A lot of conspiracies. So they kind of think in this context. And I want to get into their heads. I don't agree with anything they did. I think they kind of went a bit bonkers, to be honest, but I want to try and get into their heads, and in their mind, taking up arms was a kind of almost a logical step. And they're very small when they form, and they start off by just burning cars but they get better and better at what they're doing, and they start to kidnap people in the 70s, kill people, they escalate. Yeah. They become a very, very high-level terrorist group by the mid-1970s. And
of course, the mid-1970s, it is, if you like, and I'm using these words advisedly, the zenith of the terrorist organisations, because suddenly you've got the PLO, you've got Black September, you've got the blowing up of the airliners, kidnapping, and kidnapping becomes a thing as well. So, who are the main figures within the Red Brigades, and how are they getting their funding? How are they operating? What's the structure like? Is it three people cells? What's it doing?
They have very strict rules. There are hundreds of groups on the left and the right, but they are the most important. The reason they survive for 18 years is they have very strict rules about cells, and if they're caught, they don't know enough to bring down the whole organization. Their leaders are a mixture of student intellectuals and workers, and they get money by robberies, armed robberies, which they call proletarian expropriations, which are basically armed robberies. That's just a gloss on what they are.
Yeah.
But they self-finance themselves. Quite expensive to run a terrorist group. They get housing, they get guns. They also have links with Palestinians, the IRA, the Bader-Meinhofs, across Europe and actually globally.
Yeah.
And, they are able to, the first 10 years of organisation, not a single one of them confesses anything to police. So that's another thing. They have a very strong group identity, which means the police can't really penetrate them, a bit like the mafia. The Omertà is very powerful. And that first 10 years, not one of them, as I said, even when arrested, even when in horrible prisons, even when beaten up, doesn't give away any other comrade in their organisation.
Because you mentioned even when beaten up, it's the GIS, isn't it? Which is the Italian anti-terrorist police who are very right wing, to put it mildly, and they are being funded by, if you like, the other extreme. There is a covert police organisation who are, which will come. Which I said before, who are against the Red Brigades, and it's almost like a free for all. The laws of international policing don't apply to terrorist groups.
Yes, but it escalates as well. By the time of the kidnapping of Aldo Moro, the ex-prime minister, which is the really most spectacular operation in 1978, the parts of the state, we don't know exactly who decided this, starts to use institutionalized torture. So before they've really played by the rules, more or less, lots of suspects are beaten up, right? After 1978, the gloves are off. They're taking people they've arrested to secret locations, waterboarding them, and then they are getting names out of them because people don't resist that. And that's a kind of dark place. So one of the effects of the Red Brigades is actually to take the Italian state into a very dark place, outside of the law, outside of the constitution, using special prisons on islands. So there's a kind of horrible kind of rush to the bottom which takes place around this time, which is known as the Years of Lead in Italy, the 1970s. And
so because, for example, Bader-Meinhof are shooting industrialists, with links to, who've got questionable pasts. With Aldo Moro, and I was a small boy. I was a 10-year-old, I think, in 78. So therefore, but I remember this case. This being on the TV news, because it was, as I said, it's a spectacular act of terrorism, and I don't mean that wonderfully, but it grabs the headlines. It makes attention. Who was Aldo Moro? Explain a bit about why he was so important.
So Aldo Moro was a very senior Christian Democrat politician. The Christian Democrats were in power in Italy from basically 1945 until the 1990s. They had a huge party. They're always in government. He was at the centre. He was a moderate within the Christian Democrats. In fact, one of the things that he wanted to do was make an agreement with the communists. And the Aldo Moro case, which takes place in the middle of Rome in March 1978, broad daylight, 5 people killed, Aldo Moro taken, not shot, is Italy's JFK, because it's surrounded by hundreds of conspiracy theories, and many people think that this was done under some sort of orders to scotch the alliance between the communists and the Christian Democrats. I don't really buy into many of those, but it is a spectacular operation. I actually am quite proud to have a lyric from the Gang of Four in my book, which I got permission for, from a song which actually shows you how widespread the people had seen this on the news, all these bodies lying on the street. They take Aldo Moro and then they hold Italy kind of hostage for 50 days. He's held in Rome. The police can't find him, and they're kind of negotiating with the state, which is an extraordinary thing. If you think that these are a few people who've just come out of 68, 69, the state is actually taking them pretty seriously by 1978. And in the end, they condemn him to death execute him and drive his body across Rome in a red car, leaving it just between the Christian Democrat and Communist Party headquarters to be found. So it's an extraordinary kind of operation from a symbolic point of view as well. And people are still talking about it today.
Well, it's the imagery, isn't it? I mean, I remember that, again, because Italian press are notorious for not sort of holding back. And there's the image of his body in the boot of a Fiat, isn't there? As it's discovered, somebody's snapping away, and that splashed all over the Italian. But there's also the picture of him, in front of a Red Brigade flag, looking dishevelled.
Yes.
And again, it captures because before we've had this situation where they just go in and they just, kneecap or shoot or whatever and lop off an ear and stuff like that. But we're not used to this prolonged hostage situation, as it were. Where is, and where is he? I mean, this is, the full weight of the Italian state sort of being thrown at him.
They construct something called a people's prison, which they call a people's prison, which is a kind of cell in a house. Yeah. The photos are very important to them. Obviously, they're not doing this because they want, just want to kill someone. They're political. And the photo of Moro, there are two hostage photos which they use as negotiating tools, but also to publicize themselves. The most famous one, the kind of one where they're kind of being advertisers, basically, is the second one where he's holding a newspaper. Moro is looking at the camera holding a newspaper which says, the headline is, "Has Moro been killed?" So there's so many layers of meaning there. They're kind of like laughing at the authorities and at the state. And, people really admire them. And one of the things that really interests me was the support for them. And it's not the majority, but of course, by any means. But many people thought, this is incredible. These are the real guys, And they said later in their memoirs, all of them wrote books, that people were queuing up to join them after the Moro one, literally queuing up. And they had too many people. They couldn't. They didn't just let anyone in. That was another of the reasons they survived. But it did get a lot of support amongst minorities on the left. Because
a lot of the thing is, because you talk about it, it's this revolutionary chic, isn't it? It's everybody's got a Che Guevara picture on the wall. Everybody's admiring, like you mentioned Gang of Four, the band, but the Gang of Four, of course, goes back to Mao's China. And we don't know at that point, the horrors that have been happening since, the communist revolution. And for a lot of people, I mean, you've got Patty Hearst joining, the SLA in the States, for goodness sake, the granddaughter of Roundup, because it seems like this is the only way you're going to get the revolution that these children of the 60s are now trying to get, and it's idealistic, and they think, okay, well, we've just been through the horrors of Vietnam, over in Spain where I am at the moment, you've got the ETA, the Basque movement, which is, there's a heavily repressive, fascist regime, which is executing people and to condemn them to death. So it is seen as, look, that we can't, and that's, then you've got the provos in Northern Ireland, and it's like, well, we could, if we can't get it via people power, then we're going to have to get the revolution and our utopia by the use of arms. And so that becomes, and they're all young and they're idealistic, and it's not an excuse, but it is a recruiting tool, John, sorry.
They've become very famous and charismatic, especially when they're on trial, because when they're on trial, and I talk about this in the book, they actually challenge the whole nature of a trial. They refuse to have lawyers. They start to kill lawyers. They can't get a jury together because everyone's terrified in Turin. And they become celebrities. They're very charismatic, some of them, and they become, even today, I still find latent support for some of them, latent admiration. And it's a terrible shortcut. I mean, the book is really a tragedy in many ways, because that idea that you could shortcut traditional politics, shortcut the dirty work of actually organizing and just go straight to killing Aldo Moro or killing and using guns, attracted many people, but it's an absolute disaster from all points of view. And all it does is bring more repression and less democracy to the Italian situation. And that's the outcome of it. But at the time, many people were very attracted by it.
Because presumably there's a counter movement by the authorities. I mean, hundreds of left-wing sympathizers actually leave Italy because they are worried that they are going to be, disappear. Well, not disappear, but you see the beatings, the waterboardings, and end up in these secret prisons. So there just has a counter effect, doesn't it?
Yeah, there are roundups where they gather lots of people who haven't really got anything to do with it. There are actually incredible sophisticated techniques as well. One of my favourite stories in the book is the guy who infiltrates the Red Brigades, so they use very sophisticated infiltration techniques. He's a guy called Brother Rifle, who was at one time a priest, then went to Bolivia, took up arms, and they thought this is the perfect guy to infiltrate the Red Brigades. And he does. He manages to get right to the leaders, and they arrest a couple of the early leaders thanks to him. So there are sophisticated police techniques. A lot of Carabinieri are killed by the Red Brigades. But then there's this kind of roundup. By the end, people are many people, the majority are so upset by what the Red Brigades have done, so shocked by Morrow in particular, that, they'll support anything. And that's another terrible outcome, is the end of, lots of democratic guarantees can be got through thanks to the activities, or the reaction to the activities. By the 1980s, they're really most of them in prison. And in 1988, they officially wind up the organization. And there's a very dark ending where they start to kind of kill each other because lots of them are starting to confess, and it turns in on itself. And that's a kind of horror story that I tell towards the end of the book.
So who were the main sort of characters, if you like, of this particular, of the actual trial? I mean, who was captured? I mean, because who was seen as, if you like, the leaders?
The main leader is the most important leader was a man called Renato Curcio, who was a student in 1968 in Trento, and his kind of co-leader is a man called Franceschini, and they're the leaders. It's a very hierarchical organisation, as you can imagine. That's how it survives, and they become famous in Turin in 1978, 76, 78, because they drag out the trial for 2 years, and there's thousands of photographers who go and take photos of them. They make speeches from behind their cages, and they're quite they realize that, and they start to kind of do their hair better and wear certain clothes, and people are fascinated by them. And they're Curcio's still alive, and I tried to get to him, tried to talk to him, but it hasn't proved possible. But I still somehow would like to just sit across the table for him and talk to him today, because a lot of them are still alive and still around and out of prison.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. You have to get a sort of rapprochement if you want to carry on, because again, we're talking about, the Red Brigades, but then we have, the far right. And it's like I said, which you talk about the years of lead. And you have the bombing at Bologna, which is, the nadir, if you like, of the terrorist thing, with 85 people being killed. I mean, so both sides. And for the Italian sort of organisation, the central government, central government in inverted commas, it's an absolute nightmare for them, because they're trying to steer a very difficult path, John.
In the end, they have a kind of negotiation. It's not exactly a Good Friday Agreement, but they have they negotiate a way out of this years of lead with the right and the left, and people People are very reluctant to confess. They've got a very strong attachment to the group. But what they allow them is to say, the war is over. I'm not fighting anymore. I'm going to give up my arms. And I'm not going to be a terrorist anymore. And that allows a lot of people to get much reduced sentences, because they admit that they were wrong in some way. And this allows the end of it. It's kind of 15 years. It's a long time for political violence on right and left. And the right-wing violence is also another justification for the left-wing violence. And the left-wing violence is justification for the right-wing violence. So they feed off each other. But by the end of the 80s, 90s, they're starting to release people. And actually, I think they have quite good systems of not letting people just rot in prison. Most of them are out. Most of them are being rehabilitated. Very few have reoffended. Of course, this upsets some of the victims, understandably, or the families of the victims. But there is a peace process, but it's quite an odd one. Because it's kind of a little bit bitty in its, but it does bring about the end. And of course, the other reason that it comes to an end is the movement itself, 68, 69, is no longer there.
Yeah.
So they're operating in a complete vacuum by the end of the 1980s.
Because you haven't got the popular support for armed revolution, or because people have seen, and then we're into the 80s, and across into the areas of Reaganism, Thatcherism, and whatever.
Berlusconi.
Exactly.
Berlusconi. So it's a completely different society. It's a completely different place from it was in the. There aren't any factories anymore. They've all closed. That because the working class was still enormous in Italy. Fiat and Pirelli.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's none of that anymore. So they're very good at being terrorists. They're incredibly technically proficient, but they're operating in total isolation from the reality, and they're increasingly out of reality as they carry on, because that's the contradiction of a terrorist group in many ways, is that to succeed you have to isolate yourself, and therefore you don't really have a contact with any kind of movement by the end. But they get really good at being terrorists.
Yeah.
And actually start working with the mafia as well towards the end and things like that. But by that time they're kind of operating in some weird isolated world, which no one can really understand what they're doing anymore.
Is it a hurdle when you write something like this not to, because it's now coming up to sort of almost 50 years since the highlights of the Red Brigades? It's because you get this sort of, in the same way that Hollywood, that movies can sometimes glamorize the mafia or whatever, or criminal organizations, there is a possibility of glamorizing the Red Brigades or Baader Meinhof or those sort of things, because they are seen as of their time and of that struggle. So they become like Che was, for example, a poster in every bedroom wall, but they don't realize the brutality that goes along with that.
I really tried to avoid that, and it was something that I think when the book comes out in Italy, I'll probably get quite a lot of pushback on it. But for me, their ideas that they were the proletariat and they were the revolution, and they were communism. It's such a crazy kind of idea that they represented the working class, and they would say this in court. And when you actually look at the victims, and we haven't really talked about the victims, but a lot of the victims are young guys who joined the police, 18-year-olds, and it's pretty, and it's kind of, there's a pointlessness and nihilism to it that it makes me, I'm opposite of glamorizing them. Absolutely. I've seen that a lot in cinema, and I've seen that a lot in Italian and German society. The film about the Baader Meinhofs, for me, does glamorize the Baader, makes them all really good looking and really, beautiful and stuff. That's one of the things that I found with writing the book was actually I wanted to take the Emperor Has No Clothes. I wanted to take that mask away and show them for what they really were.
Yeah, because it's when you get the killing of young. I mean, we had this with young politicians in Spain with ETA, and one of the turning points, apart from the bombing of like civilians in supermarkets, was the kidnapping and killing of young politicians, or again, like in the Basque Country, Guardia Civil officers who literally, they're just on the side of the road. Right, it's no big political point.
And what's that achieving? I mean, it's just achieving nothing, and it's just killing for the sake of killing. And the more they go on, they're kind of saying their statements are lacking in politics. By the end, they're sort of saying, "Look, we've killed this person," and there's some people saying, "Yeah, but why?" It's like they exist to kill by the end, and the politics becomes ritualistic, and it turns even some people who might have supported them against them. Even their internal people start to say, "What are we doing? Why are we killing this person?" They kill a communist trade unionist at one point, and there's a massive backlash against it, and it's like they've kind of turned into some sort of monster which has no connection with the outside world.
But as you said, it's no connection, but it's become very proficient in being a terrorist organization.
Yeah, very good at killing.
Yeah.
But why they're doing it, even they don't know in some ways. It's kind of like that's what makes them exist. Every so often they have to kill somebody or kidnap somebody, but they don't know why they're doing it. And it's just sort of very surreal the last few years. One of the most horrific is they capture the brother of one of their comrades who's confessed as a warning to future supergrasses. And he's nothing. He's not a political person. He's an TV aerial guy with a pregnant wife. And, they interrogate him, make him say kind of things, and execute him. And it's like they've turned into something which is quite like the mafia by then, in the way they're acting. I mean, what's the difference?
That's the thing. It's the whole thing about we were supposed to do a political aim, but actually in the end they just become another gang of criminal misfits.
And their survival becomes what matters to them. The group is what matters. The survivors as a group. So it becomes this very inward looking, and kind of as if it's on another planet. And when they're captured, they're kind of like, it's almost like some of them, the scales fall away from their eyes, and they've been some have completely become people who've worked with the victims. Others remain the hardcore guys, and some women right to the end. They've never changed their minds and never admitted they did anything wrong, ever. And there's a split between them. And in the big court case for Morrow, which is a huge trial in Rome, there are 7 cages. And none of them, so the Red Brigades have split into 7 parts, and they're all arguing with each other by then. So it's all fallen apart by that point.
What are you hoping that people are going to take and from? It's a snapshot, presumably, or it's a look at a particularly bloody period of Italian history, and there have been several, but this is a particularly bloody period.
I think it's an extraordinary story, and I'm really fascinated. I'm still working on it. I've got into archives that no one's got into, and they're not just normal archives. They're archives where you open an envelope and a bullet falls out. So this is, I think it is an amazing story, and it's amazing it kind of existed in a Western democracy, an hour and a half from London. I mean, of course, we had Northern Ireland, but this happened within a Western democracy. It's almost kind of unbelievable to think it happened. But I also think it's a salutary tale today, is that there are no shortcuts to political change. Violence is not going to achieve anything. It's going to be the opposite. And I think those romantic illusions are something I want to puncture a little bit by telling this story, because I think there is a little bit of that around still. And, we're in a very violent time as well. And some of that idea that, oh, yeah, great, they killed that person, he was horrible, great. That's a shortcut that was very dangerous for me, and it's something to be thought about from the past as well.
The book is called The Red Brigades, Terrorists Who Brought Italy to Its Knees. It's by John Foote, who we're speaking to today. John, if people want to find out more about the book, the listeners, you can order it via our own virtual bookstore. Where can people find you online, John?
I work at the University of Bristol, and I've got my own website, which is john-foote.com. So, yeah, write to me. Very happy to talk to people. And my email's very public, so very happy to talk or make contact with anyone. The
book is called The Red Brigades. It's by John Foote. John, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you this morning.
Thanks so much for the interview.